The yeast cells. Part 1. The yeast cells realize the food in their petri dish is limited. The yeast cells thought they'd be fine, didn't think that they'd ever decline, but they were just passing through the way life forms do till conditions become less benign. The size of the mess on their root made money and politics moot. They could rearrange but not basically change their die-off from overshoot. The yeast cells foresaw analytically that growth would deplete their food critically. They'd still be fine now if only somehow they'd have come to consensus politically. The cells in their dish's debut were a few with lots they could chew, but they could not undo what was true once they grew, though they tried to use bargaining too. The cells faced a grave situation, which led straight to annihilation. Whose fault they were screwed, the dish or the food or their own lack of determination? Part 2. The yeast cells tried to find a way out of their predicament. As doom started getting more mention, it increased political tension. To pick out a fiend, they promptly convened the famous Great Yeast Cell Convention. The yeast cells they talked wrong and right, and complex beliefs did recite, like about bad and good, as if those things could be useful in fixing their plight. They pushed for depletion prevention and technical hopes for invention. But yeast needs supply, so to their surprise, their end was beyond comprehension. Politician cells bribes they pursued, while some paper money accrued. But none of this brawl would matter at all, 'cause none of it got them more food. Those yeast cells they sure like to eat. To do it, they might even cheat. The urge was so strong, it swept all along. No government form could compete. Part 3. Lack of food leads to warfare for the yeast cells. They like to find others to blame, although that was morally lame. But plain overshoot was setting their root, and not just some cells they could frame. To eat less not one would commit. Each cell wanted others to quit. They picked on the lame, upon whom to blame what none was about to admit. The cells thought dish was Earth Mother, when hungry fought brother v. brother. Despite what was fate with that danged anger trait, they formed teams and blamed one another. The yeast cells all looked much the same, but when the great food shortage came, they learned to distinguish which ones to extinguish by making them take all the blame. The yeast cells proclaimed right makes might, and being right, they'd win each fight. With slogans they said, bad yeast should be dead, and we are the good guys, right? The cells pitched a terrible fight, as food shortage worsened their plight. They chose up their teams by rightness, it seems, but who can say which one was right? They tried to decide whom to hate and which boogeyman to create. It was hard to decide, but a look from outside showed no one to blame. It was fate. Part 4. The yeast cells finally find acceptance. The yeast cells, it's true, they felt pain, but the whole ecologic domain, the dish-wide flat plane, was found to contain indifference when yeast cells complain. They grew in a culture replete with money so they could compete. With all of that bread, the yeast cells grew dead 'cause it wasn't the kind you can eat. From what did the yeast problem stem? What was wrong inside them to condemn? They played a good game till food shortage became the wrong situation for them. So then at their life's conclusion, brought on by food source occlusion, they relearned jungle law, and the last thing they saw was through their consensual illusion. The yeast cells, they knew it was late, so they got all depressed and irate. They took bargaining bait, but the plan which worked great was accepting themselves and their fate. Hee-haw!